make of the reaction with the shares here?
Well, I think you have to look at the macro environment and just what's happening with interest rates and a lot of the uncertainties. So those are factors that are out of our control. And as I've said many times on your program over the years, we can only focus on what we can control. And we posted stellar numbers. We've noted that we were the second fastest company ever to reach $2 billion of ARR. And if you look at the growth rates, even our rule of 40 at 84%, it's just astounding at the scale that we're operating at.
Is cybersecurity recession-proof, or could it be under threat if companies, they're deciding where to pull back, and cyber is one of them?
I think it's going to be difficult for companies to really pull back on cyber. They might delay some purchases. There might be more scrutiny, which is one of the things that we talked about. But at the end of the day, there's just too many drivers at the board level all the way down. Cyber is the number one risk that most boards are talking about. And then when you combine that with some of the regulatory pressures, like the SEC is coming out with some guidance around disclosing breaches, disclosing if you had to pay ransom payments. So at the end of the day, it's something that is going to be very difficult to make it a nice to have. And it really is a must have for most companies. And I think that's what we've seen. So, we'll see how it plays out over time. That's our thesis. And I think we're in a great spot to consolidate a lot of spend in our sector.
Let's talk about your assessment of the threat landscape right now. How concerned are you about China specifically upping the groundwork for launching more cyber attacks against the West, given rising tensions with Taiwan?
You always have to be concerned about China and other nation states, but China certainly is prolific in its attacks. It has great capabilities, and it continues to be active in many, many different areas. So as we've seen before, as the geopolitical environment changes, the attacks change. They may focus on different groups and gathering information. They may target, chip manufacturers, et cetera. I mean, these are all areas that are of concern to many, executives in the marketplace right now. And when the geopolitical winds change, you have to be prepared to make sure that your systems are protected.
Chris Krebs, the former director of CISA, suggested these attacks would come on the supply chain. I mean, you mentioned chip factories. How vulnerable do you think the supply chain is?
Well, supply chain attacks are a grave concern for many companies. And getting back to the board of directors, it is a huge risk. We've seen some of the large attacks over the past couple of years. And whether that's in the software supply chain or even, there's software that goes into the code of these chips, obviously, that can be problematic. So it's one of those areas. It's very, very difficult to identify these. They do have a long tail. And it's something that companies and governments need to be really vigilant about.
We're preparing for a suite of new regulations coming from CISA, the FTC, the FDA, the Department of Energy and Transportation. What are you specifically preparing for when it comes to regulation?
Well, I think you have to look at the regulation itself, and there's a lot of regulation that has the best of intentions. But then you have to look at how these are implemented. And what's important, and we do a lot of breach responses. We're one of the top 2 breach response firms in the world. And in the middle of a breach, it's very difficult to be talking about all the disclosures. So I think it's really important to understand the time frame and not to be able to compromise an investigation. And then what are the parameters around that? What is material? What should be disclosed, and how do you disclose it? I think there's a lot of complexity around that. We're at the table trying to work through that with many organizations. But what's important is that people have visibility, because you can't just say you didn't know about it, right? You have to take measures to be able to instrument your systems, like what Crowdstrike does, to be able to identify and prevent against these potential breaches.